Hello and welcome to another week of Political Party. I'm Hamish
And I'm Tim.
and we are Political Party. So, coming up on the show this week, firstly, we have a debate about whether or not internet access should be a human right. Then, Blundergate, a segment where we examine some of the humorous mistakes made by our politicians. Then, Less Sexy Than ISIS. And finally,
We're talking about some funny stories from the internet.
exactly. So, hope everyone's had a good week.
It's been 7 whole days since we last spoke to everyone.
7 whole days, goodness.
So much depressing stuff has happened in the political world. We'll get to that. But we're going to kick off the show today with a debate about internet access. So, I'll give you a brief overview of what this debate's all about. Recently, Facebook have launched an initiative called internet.org. You've seen the billboards everywhere, right? You've seen Nisha, the daughter of magicians, right? And what this is although it might not seem clear, internet.org is an organization that is aiming to bring internet to 2/3 of the planet who are not connected to the internet.
Would have thought the org in the title kind of gave it away.
The motto is the more we connect, the better it gets. And we're going to have a talk about that today because establishing new human rights is it's not a new process, but it's a very difficult and a very rocky one.
Yeah, I mean, for starters, what even is a human right? Is it really does it really extend to such things as internet?
Yep, that's true. So all right, we'll have a look at the first argument today. It presents economic opportunities. So what that means is it connects people to opportunities, the internet. The internet itself creates opportunities, and those opportunities, those jobs, etc., will increase the GDP of the economies in these countries as well as increase employment.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, first of all, there are plenty of jobs in internet development, software development, developing web pages and so forth. But additionally, you also have marketing opportunities that are unparalleled. The internet is an enormous force multiplier when it comes to marketing because the ability to just be able to share your brand on Facebook to a potentially global audience cannot be matched by very many items of conventional media, and certainly none that people in these poor countries could afford.
Yeah, it's a good point, Hamish. But here's the problem, right? Here's the problem with internet access becoming a human right. Is that human rights, when they were established, particularly in the post-war era of the League of Nations, when the League of Nations became the UN, human rights were established as institutionalized protections from other people. Stuff like freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of self-determination for religion. And so when you've got these new rights about, the right to the clean environment and the right to internet access, it becomes rocky because you're not protecting anyone from anything.
I don't know. See, the thing with internet access is that have you heard of net neutrality?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, net neutrality is basically this thing where the government agrees to not allow any ISPs to favor certain websites or disfavor certain websites. You could view this right as a means of protecting people from the greedy ISPs and allowing everyone free universal internet access. That is what could be protected by this human right.
Yeah.
However, I mean, apart from that, the case for making internet a human right as such, an official human right, really isn't that strong. It's more about just allowing universal internet access, in my opinion.
That's a good point. Yeah, because human rights aren't very, they're not binding. You can't, a lot of them aren't binding, sorry. Like, if you kill someone, that's obviously means for action from the international community. But
yeah.
If you fail to provide internet for your people, even if this were, recognized as a human right, it wouldn't necessarily mean that the states can be held to account.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, some states have massive bills of rights. Take North Korea. That's got a fabulous bill of rights. But I don't think anyone's particularly considering North Korea to be a bastion of freedom.
That's true. The problem with that is that the problem with rights being, there to protect you from one another is that, like we've been saying, these rights aren't binding. These rights don't hold anyone to account. They don't have to provide them, right? That means it's an aspiration. It means that we're saying, let's just recognize this so more states can act on this, as well as, private companies and non-government organizations as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it means that, not all states can obviously take responsibility for the internet access of their people, but what they can do is, once this gets recognized, or if it gets recognized as a human right, these countries will be able to, the world as a whole will be able to move to complete access to the internet for everyone.
Yeah, they'll be able to take steps to facilitate it. Although, I can't help but feel that if the government provides internet, it will surely also provide a means to perform surveillance over the internet. And as we've seen, surveillance over the internet is arguably the most effective and potentially intrusive kind of surveillance. See
Yep.
last week for more details.
The thing about storing that data, as we said last week, on the plus side, it helps prevent terrorism. It helps give you the edge, especially when you've got more advanced technology than the people that you're purporting to protect the population from.
Yeah.
But in the same instance, increasing the amount of internet that these countries have access to opens them up to cyber terrorism.
Funny you bring up terrorism, exactly, because that is definitely something that could be facilitated by having internet as a universal human right. I mean, internet encryption technology is a thing. People can send messages without their governments really knowing what they're doing. And only big governments, like the US and so forth, have the ability to actually crack these encryptions. Small countries could never do it without software provided to them by the big countries, which would probably already be obsolete by the time they've done so. So, this allowing internet as a human right would definitely facilitate the acts of terrorism, both cyber terrorism and real-life terrorism. It would allow terrorists a means of secure communication from anywhere, especially given some of these plans to implement universal internet access involve launching satellites into space, like lots of small ones, so that they broadcast their signal everywhere. So that means terrorists could have internet in their cave in Afghanistan, for example.
Good point. And you can tell us more about that after our first song. Our first song that we're going to play for you this week is our every week we have a song by an Australian, a song sung by a female-fronted band, and also a pro-American song. So,
Oil, be sure to pay close attention to this one.
This is our Australian song of the week. This song is a protest song to the Australia-US alliance that started evolving throughout the Cold War.
It's about the establishment of US institutions on Australian soil.
Yeah. This is US Forces, Midnight Oil. US Forces, give the nod.
See, here's the thing. I mean, it's a good song and all, but I just can't take his voice seriously. Like,
he's got a very good singing voice.
His voice and his dancing.
It's very his dancing.
Maybe if he'd kept dancing like that, he would have been more popular with the electorate. But alas, such is life.
Such is life. He still got elected.
True.
So we're going to talk about education now and how that's enabled by internet access becoming a human right.
So
Hamish?
Having internet access as a human right would allow for the protection of the internet, and as we all know, the internet is an extremely powerful educational resource. The ability to just Google search something and come up with like dozens, if not hundreds, of sources, all relevant to what you're searching up, and many that aren't. That ability is extremely powerful and will enormously contribute to education around the world. Some sites like Wikipedia are basically authorities on certain subjects. Like librarians, please don't hate me, but it's true. So
You're right.
From education, there comes a lot of benefits. I mean, some people may be interested in science and they could just use the internet to read up about science in countries where their teachers may not be very good. And then they could use this knowledge of science to, I don't know, develop things, immigrate abroad. People can use the internet to look up, say, the law, understand their rights, know their country's laws. Education just brings so many benefits, and all these benefits are just a component of the internet, really.
Yeah, that's true. One recurring theme throughout that overview you just gave us was self-teaching.
Yeah.
These people are able to self-teach themselves a lot of skills, and that has wider implications for what this is going to mean for people. You can
Some
You
of the
know,
greats of
the few in society who know how to read can teach others how to read.
Yeah.
There will be, an increase in literacy, and therefore there will be an increase in learning with these people.
Yeah, and some of the great entrepreneurs of our time were self-taught in their initial businesses. I mean, Elon Musk, who founded Tesla Motors and SpaceX and PayPal, largely taught himself about all these subjects. He didn't learn them from university. He learned them his own way, and now he's thinking of partnering with Google to launch the satellites into space to allow internet access around the world.
That's interesting. Tell us a bit about that.
So essentially, Google already had this idea to launch weather balloons containing like internet equipment so that everyone could get cheap, easy internet access. And then SpaceX were all like, well, we've got these rockets. Why don't you just build microsatellites and we'll launch them into space for you? And that's essentially this thing.
Yeah. And so that gives that's an incredible means, because a lot of the criticism of this human right is that, access to internet is not going to be particularly easy.
A few years ago, it would have been impossible to think that we could actually be discussing this now with a straight face.
Yeah, absolutely. This sort of that sort of initiative shows a couple of things. Firstly, it shuts down the practicality counter argument to this case.
Yeah.
About how it's very hard to just give internet to everyone, but also it provides evidence of how how private transnational corporations are actually working in a seemingly altruistic way.
I mean, the thing is, you can always trace a company's motives to profit, but in this case, I can see how you could trace these motives to profit without there being any hidden meaning. Although naturally, the potential that someone, CIA, has paid them to like have deliberate weaknesses in their security that only the CIA know about, that's a possibility, but I'd prefer not to consider it. I would prefer to instead think that they see this deployment of microsatellites or whatever, or like, Facebook's internet.org. I'd prefer to think that they see this as a means to expand their markets and thus attract more revenue, and this is simply an elaborate marketing strategy that just incidentally happens to benefit many of the world's most vulnerable population. Many of the world's most vulnerable population cannot into English. Anyway.
Yeah, that sort of gives you reason to ask yourself, is it okay for these, Google, SpaceX, is it okay for them to be profiteering out of this? I mean, you can say, like, there's definitely a counterpoint to that, but the fact that Google, the biggest one of the biggest technological moguls on the planet, is getting around this altruistic purpose is quite a remarkable feat.
Yeah, it's kind of scary thinking that one company could have such a large monopoly. But I guess on the other hand, the benefits from what they're doing are so huge that it is still justifiable, in my opinion.
Yeah, and speaking of conspiracies, we're going to go to a song now. This is by a band that isn't quite as well known. This is a band called Boxcar Racer, which was formed by former Blink-182 singer Tom DeLonge in 2004. This is about 9/11 in a narrative sense, both from the perspective of the victim and a bystander. This is Elevator.
Good song. I'd rate that a 9 out of 11.
Oh,
It's all over now. Anyway.
he's gone there. Let's talk about democracy, Hamish.
Let's talk about democracy.
Internet access to the world. What that means for democracy is it's a couple of things. Firstly, it's the internet itself is a platform for global citizenship.
Yeah, like on the internet, you're stripped of any labels that are associated with you. It doesn't matter if you're a woman, black, a color other than white, a gender other than male. Everyone's going to judge you the same unless you reveal more about yourself. So it really is a massive equalizer for society.
Yeah, that's true. What you're talking about is like, it's probably the most important point in this debate, because what we've got is that it transcends borders.
Yes.
It creates camaraderie, you know, amidst all the disputes of nationality,
Yeah, I
and
mean, people-
ethnicity, religion,
Thanks to the
gender,
internet.
sexuality. It goes on.
Thanks to the internet, a person from Russia and a person from Ukraine can have a conversation and become friends without even knowing that they're on potentially opposing sides.
That's such a sweet love story.
Not
It's certainly
saying
a
that
better
all
love
Russians.
story than Twilight. With yeah, no, it's really important to democracy also for accountability purposes.
Yes.
You've got in Australia a right we take for granted is the fact that our government posts all of their bills and all of their question time transcripts online.
Yeah.
In countries like Ghana, for example, they don't have that, and so the access to the internet, particularly in countries like Niger that have a 1.1% of their population connected to the internet, this allows for you know, this allows those governments to be held to account, but of course that can have its consequences.
Actually, the internet also provides another benefit in holding governments to account. Thanks to the aforementioned encryption, it makes it much easier for whistleblowers to leak sensitive information because they just have this massive global audience all of a sudden. I mean, look at Julian Assange. If we were still back in the day of newspapers, it would have been a big story, but it wouldn't have gotten the massive worldwide attention that it did. And I mean, Snowden as well. The Snowden revelations were able to be spread
absolutely.
much faster because of the internet, even if the internet was partially responsible for them in the first place.
The internet, WikiLeaks and OpenLeaks, those two companies are the big leakers, and they're holding governments to account. So all of us people sitting in Australia can go, ha ha ha, how dare you partner up with Shell behind the back doors of the political world, Nigeria. But people in those countries might not have access to that information. They might not know what's happening.
Exactly. Although I think in Nigeria, Shell is not particularly subtle, but
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. So another point that comes out of this is health. Hamish and I were speaking about this before the show. Simply getting access to information about health in a lot of these countries can have a huge effect on prevention and treatment of a lot of very easily curable diseases.
Not just even that, but I'm going to single out STDs here because the internet allows it allows people to easily discover what they are, their symptoms, and how to avoid getting them. And that could have enormous potential benefits for health in the long run.
Yeah, man. And
considering that AIDS and other STDs are some of the main killers in Africa.
That's true. Diseases like tetanus, malaria, and diarrhea are things that we just go to Chemist Warehouse and buy a box of pills for
or
$4.
you can just have a shot at curing it, you know.
Yeah. And there's no access to that overseas. So as we were speaking about earlier, business opportunities where people are able to access opportunities from overseas through the internet. What's happening at the moment is that countries like Australia, for a lot of really expensive consulting work, like reading MRI scans, for example, Australia outsources to doctors actually situated in India.
Of course, it's India. It's always India when it comes
because
to
they're becoming a very increasingly educated population, despite the fact that only 13% of them are connected to the internet.
The 13% are just so prolific. Like, most of the world outsources its software development to India now.
Yeah. And so, but what that means is the reverse effect, right? These countries like Ghana, Azerbaijan, these underdeveloped countries will now be able to potentially outsource a lot of their medical advice to countries like India, countries like Australia, countries like the United States.
Ghana be a good thing. But another thing where it also works in the reverse, and richer Western countries may see an opportunity to outsource their medical procedures to these poorer countries because the rates will be cheaper.
Yeah, we're getting jobs, and that's good. We've got to acknowledge the counterpoint here. It's important that we recognize that the internet is subject to the will of the people in that specific country.
It kind of is. The internet is a massive hive mind, and the internet opens up the means for a lot of attacks, a lot of abuse, depending on what the general public's will, I suppose, at the time is.
it's very easy for us to talk about a lot of these benefits that these countries are going to get, but 80% of online data is in English.
Yes. Now, as an English speaker, that can only be a good thing because it'll mean more people around the world are going to have to speak English. Deal with it.
But that also means that a lot of countries might be, they won't have their nationality, language, culture, and ethnicity represented in the online market, and they'll be open to what a couple of organizations have very neatly and subtly called Western neo-imperialism and profiteering.
I wouldn't necessarily say language by itself is indicative of such imperialism, but I would definitely say that it's leading to, or it would help lead to, cultural homogenization.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I reckon in the long run, cultural homogenization is going to be a good thing because it will help humanity to put aside its differences and unite. Although, as we've seen, clearly the fact that two people speaking English does not necessarily guarantee they won't go to war with each other. It certainly helps.
Yeah, that's a good point, Hamish. So we're sort of nearing the end of this debate here. I just want to quickly speak about a couple of the initiatives that internet.org by Facebook has created. Firstly, they've created a lab in cooperation with Ericsson Corp, and that's devoted to development of technology that will enable the access to the internet in a lot of remote areas. You spoke about SpaceX and Google's satellites. And
there's
also
another one actually that I'd like to mention. It's in India. This one telco in India has started providing completely free internet access to certain sites like Facebook to allow communication.
Yeah. And lastly, the big project by internet.org is an app aptly named internet.org. And what that does is it provides access to basic services, education, mediums, access to information about health and all that good stuff. But it does it for free, which is interesting. None of the data that is accessed through the internet.org app can be charged to an ISP or a data carrier.
Well, that's pretty damn good.
Yeah. And that's pretty much all we've got for this debate. Hamish, where do you stand? Should internet access be a human right?
Well, I don't think it should be a human right, but I do think it should be defended wherever possible. I just feel like codifying it as a human right could lead to the degeneration of what it means to be a human right, but then I guess we have the right to environmental cleanliness, so maybe you can't possibly sink lower than that.
That's true. Personally, I think that the purpose of human rights is to set a standard, to set out what the world we want to aspire to is going to look like. And so I think that saying that internet access should definitely be an institutionalized human right will push the world in the right direction to being healthier, more educated, and more free in the long run.
Fair enough. Now, those are legit points, and I do support internet access for everyone. So
that's all we've got for our debate. This is a bit more of a happier song. This is about changing the world. This is called Rise Today. This is Alter Bridge.
Welcome to this week's Blundergate. This week's Blundergate, the Israeli election. That's right. Now, as some of you may or may not be aware, the Israeli... Is he the Prime Minister?
Yep, yeah. Prime Minister.
Prime Minister Netanyahu, during the election period, made some extremely offensive remarks. Firstly, we will not recognize a two-state solution under any circumstances. Israel only. Now, that's bit of a putting a foot in his mouth there, because that's, for the past few years, Israel has kind of verbally supported a two-state solution, but they haven't actually done anything to implement it. So really, this is just confirming what many people thought, that Netanyahu never intended to implement a two-state solution. He also said that Arab voters are coming to the polls in truckloads, and Israeli voters must stop them from affecting the outcome of power. Now, I'd like to point out that some of these Arabs are not actually as far removed from our culture as we think. They are among the descendants of the first worshippers of Jesus Christ. They're Christians. And here's Netanyahu going and just saying, look out, truckloads of Arabs.
Yeah, We had a soundbite prepared, but it was not in English, so we weren't going to play
such
that.
is life.
I've got the transcript of the quote in question today. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Yahoo,
Woo! Nah.
had a This is what he said: "The right-wing government is in danger. Arab voters are coming out in droves to the polls. Save us from the left. Save us from Labour." That's pretty extraordinary because he's saying that they're coming out in droves, like a drove.
Like it's used to refer to cattle. This Israel, what he said.
Yeah,
get it?
He's saying there's a mass. Oh my God. He's saying that there's a mass of people, Arab voters, which make up 20% of the population in Israel, are acting together as one homogenous body to take down the Netanyahu government.
Oh, dearie me.
That's hilarious.
And then the instant he got into election, he reversed his early comments, saying, "You know what? A two-state solution really wouldn't be a bad thing." This is after receiving near universal condemnation from the international community, including Barack Obama. This is not going to be helpful for his relationship with the US president.
For anyone who doesn't know the two-state solution, it's a proposed UN mandate that shows the Israeli-Palestine area being shared between both the Arab world, which is Palestine, and the Jewish Zionist state, Israel. Yeah, this is So what do you think about these comments? I mean, he said it in a political ad, right? It wasn't something that he said just like off the cuff. Randomly.
No, what I think is that this was really a Freudian slip. I think this was his policy all along, because he really has done nothing to help implement a two-state solution, and he was just being honest with the voters in an attempt to appeal to Israeli nationalists. I'd like to point out the far right is rather strong in Israel because ultra-Orthodox Jews will almost always vote for far-right parties.
Yeah, the way I sort of saw this was, it was an ad, right? And he said that Arab voters are coming out in droves, save us from the left, save us from Labour. Like, is it standard practice? I mean, personally, I think it is. We see this in Australia all the time. It's just an ad of fear-mongering. He just happened to take it way too far with blatant assumptions, racism, and bias that sort of head-on tackled what is the biggest, one of the biggest territorial and ethno-religious disputes in the history of the planet.
Yeah. But it'd be like some Australian minister saying, "Oh, look out for the boat people. They're going to steal the votes. They're going to take our jobs. They'll vote their Islamist parties into parliament." Gosh, how far-fetched that anyone could say such things.
And his apology, he had an apology speech, and it was he used the word Arab citizens 14 times.
Yes, because there is a single universal Arab state encompassing all Arabs in the world.
He's like, that's his subtle way of saying, "Oh my God, I am so sorry. You guys are totally citizens of our country, and we've got to recognize you before people start losing trust in us." So,
oh dear.
Every week we've got a female-fronted band that opens up for our because we think women in rock, they rock too.
Yeah, exactly.
This is Paramore, Decode. It was a bloody good song.
Oh no, you stole it from me.
We've
always stealing me jokes and saying you don't know me. No, but So
we're going to talk about our next segment, which is less sexy than ISIS. This is our weekly segment where we go over the issues from the Middle East, the greater Middle East and North African region.
Wasn't ISIS quite attractive, being the goddess of fertility and all? I'm sorry.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Nah, she's Egyptian. She's
Is
like
that
the goddess of the Nile.
And did the
Are you in denial?
The construction company must have named themselves after a goddess. Very hyper masculine, very good image. We're talking about anti-gay laws in Kyrgyzstan today. If you don't know where Kyrgyzstan is, I don't blame you. It's a fringe Middle Eastern state in southwestern Asia, former Soviet state, and currently they're trying to pass two bills in parliament. The first criminalizes, and I shit you not, this is a quote from the bill, it criminalizes pro-homosexual propaganda.
It actually sounds a lot like Russia's law. I think Russia's law had a very similar name, or very similar, like, target.
Yeah. Human Rights Watch are a pretty prominent non-government organization that show all these, that expose all of these these
Potential laws.
these potential laws. So that's quite an explicit law that they're trying to pass. The second one is the implicit. They've called it. This is actually what it's been referred to, is the Foreign Agents Bill. What it does is it restricts the operation, freedom, and it limits the operation of non-government organizations. And Human Rights Watch, the organization that's reported this story this week, has outright specifically said that the state is targeting LGBT sympathetic groups.
Now, see, as a very paranoid person, I would have been somewhat sympathetic with that law up to the point where they are specifically targeting groups that advocate a certain issue. I mean, surely you'd embed spies in like freedom of information groups or whatnot, not freaking LGBT.
Yeah, you're right, and that's the justification for these bills. We've got to stop non-government organizations from saying, that being lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or intergender is a good thing. We can't have that because spies, and that's it.
Wow, that's despisable logic.
That is incredibly despisable logic.
But from what little I've seen, and I've only really followed two states on this being one, in the post-Soviet space, there's been a lot of anti-gay material.
Absolutely.
I think this must be a trait left over from the Soviet Union, which was supposedly at the forefront of social progression.
Yeah, it's part of the culture. The whole it's part of that long-term historical context. They're an incredibly conservative area, Kyrgyzstan, which is like fringe Southwest Asia and fringe Middle East. So it's they're still quite liberal in terms of their policies. Like, it's certainly not an authoritarian, theocratic kind of hellfest like Pakistan seems to be to us Westerners. But these anti-gay laws are they're explicitly anti-homosexual, and there's absolutely, no recourse for this for those people because they're often disenfranchised and disillusioned in those countries.
It's a tough one. Well, such is life in Kyrgyzstan.
Such is life everywhere. Quote of the day. We're seeing, freedom of association, freedom of expression, and freedom of protection from institutionalized discrimination, which is what these bills are trying to do. That's the critique of this. The vote goes to the floor in June for both of these bills, and they are copping huge backlash from the international community, but their state-controlled national media is actually not covering this.
But the thing is, I think that some of these nationals may agree with the laws, and that would make it very hard to repeal them in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. What we're seeing now is, in contrast to what we were saying during the internet access debate, this is still a very sheltered country. They are still grappling with the vices of homophobia, xenophobia, and very, very ingrained hatred for a lot of alternative and emerging belief systems.
Yes, definitely.
We're on the idea of cynicism. We're gonna go to our last song for today. This is our patriotic song of the week with a twist. This is a song about a soldier who is treated poorly by the military, treated poorly by his friends and family and by society when he returns home from service, and yet still does all of this with his hand across his heart and the flag in the air because of how much he truly loves the USA.
Well, I guess he'll just soldier on.
This is Hero of War. War to good song.
Yes.
This is our final.
It's really a heroic effort.
It's a very complicated song, but it's also very, very simple. This is our final segment of the week, everyone. This is US politics as read by The Onion.
So
The Onion being a parody newspaper.
Nah, it's not a parody newspaper. It's definitely what's actually happening, and you should all believe it 100%.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
Hamish, what's our story for this week?
Gerrymandering mishap leaves nation without any borders whatsoever. That's borderline crazy. US in chaos after all district, state, national boundaries erased overnight.
Oh my God.
Urging calm after citizens awoke to find the country's political boundaries had disappeared completely. Audience announced Thursday that a devastating gerrymandering blunder had left the United States devoid of any district, state, or national borders whatsoever. Though our investigation is still ongoing, it appears that the North Carolina General Assembly may have inadvertently wiped out all local and federal boundaries while redrawing the state's already heavily manipulated 4th Congressional District last night, said White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest.
That's really horrifying news. That's
Imagine a land without borders, gosh.
like a land without borders. It's just,
like
we've,
state
we've,
borders. Like
we've actually got the picture in front of us here, everyone listening. The United States is just a big grey blob. There's no borders, there's no states, there's no districts, there's no counties.
I mean, states perform all sorts of important functions, like
We're having a bit of trouble thinking about what the state government does, because in Australia they do precisely nothing.
Oh, I don't know. In Australia, they're a good way of delegating authority, in my opinion. But
Yeah.
this, dearie me. Still,
Yeah, our hearts go out to all the United States citizens who are currently unable to pay their taxes. No way. Because they don't have any district authority to report to.
or who currently don't affiliate with anywhere except the good old US of A.
Yeah, so now they can sit there with the flag that they love and the flag that they trust. But unfortunately, they've got pretty much shit all.
Yeah, well, that's the way, I guess.
Yep. So that's sort of bringing us to the end of the show this week. That's on a pretty depressing note from America. That's totally serious news, by the way, Hamish.
Totally serious.
We only report serious news on this station.
Only report serious news. Yep. Well, thank you for listening for another week. Those of you that listened.
Yeah. No, it was it was a good week. We spoke about internet access. We talked some shit about Netanyahu and anti-gay laws in Kyrgyzstan, because ISIS isn't the only news story that comes out of the Middle East.
Exactly. ISIS is simply a convenient scapegoat.
Thanks for joining us this week, everyone.
Sometimes.
I'm Tim.
ISIS is actually pretty bad. And I'm Hamish.
And we'll see you next week, Monday at 9 a.m.
Political party. Putting the cool in political.